I remember burning transistors, connecting things the other way around, and like put together PCBs. I remember this one student from room next door coming over and knocking on the door. It's like, hey girls, do you have some pans that we could like borrow to fry some eggs? And he saw my soldering iron on my desk and he was like, whoa!
Hey friends, this is Podcast Ruined by Software Engineer. On this episode, I get to talk to Dagna Bieda, engineer turned coach for engineers and author of the book Brain Refactor. If you enjoy Podcast Ruined by Software Engineer, don't forget to hit the follow button on your podcast app so you don't miss out on the new episodes. And you can pick up podcast merch at perrytiu.com/shop. Enjoy the episode. Welcome back to another episode of Podcast Ruined by Software Engineer. I'm your host Perry, and today with me is Dagna Bieda, engineer turned coach for engineers, speaker, author of the recently released book Brain Refactor. Dagna, how are you today?
Hi Perry, I am super excited to be here today. Thanks for having me.
No, thank you for being on the show. I keep on saying it that like the book itself, of course, it's a wealth of information, and I keep on saying that like people live through the software engineering life, and in terms of being able to like actually read it through and having like a framework and having a lot of like knowledge, like psychological knowledge, technical knowledge, and putting all that together in a book, I think that's something that is a blessing, if anything, that I get to ask these questions and a lot of people get to hear about it. So big thank you and welcome again onto the show. I think for a lot of this though is that, I mean, I don't want to spoil anything, I can't really describe it the best myself, but who is Dagna and what, you know, in a couple of highlight words, what is the book Brain Refactor?
Dagna is an engineer turned coach for engineers and ambitious professionals in tech. And the book basically talks about how you can optimize your internal code to thrive in tech and engineering and get more success, fulfillment, money, opportunities, impact, and growth. And you do that basically refactoring your brain. You know, human brains are very similar to how we write code, and if you can refactor code, you can also refactor your brain. I'm just going to tell you how to use your programming skills to do exactly that.
I just love, I mean, I'm sure a lot of people tell you this, but I love the word refactor in this context, right? Like as engineers, I'm sure we're going to get into that in a little bit in terms of like what kind of dev you've done and everything. But like the word refactor, somebody, I don't know, I was talking to a friend about this, where you could draw a chart in terms of like the number of times you use the word refactor, and the more years you work in software engineering, like the more amount of times you say refactor, because we understand that it's a good thing, right? It's not just about new features, it's about seeing what's there and being able, as you were saying, like you were naming a lot of stuff that everybody wants, right? Like success, everybody wants some fulfillment, money, all that kind of fun thing everybody wants into that. But one thing that I do also like to understand even before jumping into the book itself is the background. Because I mean, like you've done a lot of engineering, and we need people that have done a lot of engineering to understand engineers on that. But maybe before then, when you were, I guess, like growing up, was it obvious that you were going to be an engineer? Was there a lot of influence, whether it's like your cousins around you that were already playing with computers, or your family members or friends doing that? Like, what did that environment look like, or where did you grow up even?
You know, I grew up in rural Poland, so there's not really a lot of tech around me. Although my parents, in their business, they were the very first one that had a computer with MS-DOS. And guess what? It had Aladdin and Lion King games on it. So I was on top of it as much as they would allow me. And I didn't really have that much of an engineering inspiration per se, but when I was like a teenager, maybe 15 years old, I knew I wanted to build the future, whatever that means in the mind of a 15-year-old, you know? So essentially, when I was picking my education in Poland, it's very structured, unlike the US, which is very flexible in how you create your curriculum. I picked a high school that focused on math and physics, and then ended up graduating, getting into college, one of the best ones in Poland. And I picked robotics because building robots sounded like the most futuristic thing that I could do in order to build the future, right? So that's kind of how it started.
That's so good, especially in the sense you're obviously naming like very popular like games and apps, and from back then I was like the MS-DOS of just looking at those terminals and everything. So even highlighting that, then I guess What was your first computer, as you were saying? Like, do you remember what was the actual exact machine?
I do not. I just remember the blue MS-DOS and the little sticky notes that my dad had on the monitor with the commands written so I would know how to get into the games.
That's what it was, right? Forget about the nice UIs backend, forget about everything that. You already had to have this like innate sense of like debugging and like just understanding that, oh, I miswrote this command in there, and that's basically
Right?
the
I
end
was
of it.
dealing with the command line since I was like 6 or 7, so
That's so good. And of course, like the thinking mind of like going into robotics, as we were saying, like that's something that nowadays maybe it's a lot more popular, left and right. Every company wants people that are building arms from whatever factory back then. But was there already some exposure to coding back then when you were going into this university? I believe it's Rockland University of Science and Technology back then. Was there already influences of like, hey, maybe you should learn how to do a bit of Java, or even C or C++ back then?
yes, I had some programming classes in high school and it was Pascal, right? So, like, super ancient technologies we're talking here about. But when I get into college, in Poland, again, the curriculum is very strict. So I really actually hated programming classes whenever I started because there's such a steep learning curve to programming. And at the very beginning, for, the years that I was in college, I felt like I had completely no idea what was happening, and it was overwhelming. It was daunting. Many times my programming classes would literally make me cry at night because I was like, why is this not compiling? And I started with C++, and C. So it was like, tossing someone in a deep water, just telling them like, yep, now you learn how to swim.
Basically, I can imagine the days with the Alex and the Malix. I mean, that's what we did during comp sci. I don't do any serious C++ nowadays, but I could definitely hear a lot of the war stories of the unsafeness of using those languages. But one thing that obviously like eventually turned into a coach and everything, but even back then in terms of like the people around you, this is some of the highlights that I think about my experience of like whether I was in university or like my first few years of working in tech and everything. Like there's all kinds of characters around me. For example, in university, it was a range. I went to McGill University, still very great in terms of comp sci and everything, but it was a whole speculum. There are people that just like were genius. They were, I don't know how it works. Genius absolutely got recruited, of course, like the big techs, like the Microsoft, Snapchat, after went there. And then there's other ones just like me out there, just kind of wandering around, just like doing comp sci and just trying to figure out maybe how to like, I don't know. We had a project on, can you build like a CPU or like not a physical one, but like a virtual CPU where you just put a lot of legs on that. So I was more of that crowd, but from your already like I guess like exposure to like-minded people in university, did you notice any kind of specific group of people? Was it just mostly very intelligent people just because of your context, or was there like already a range of like characters of people learning computer science back then?
Totally, a range of characters. And like a lot of things changed for me because I used to be an A student in primary, elementary, middle, and high school. And then I realized, man, I'm going to college. Like, who cares about grades, right? And I wanted to party. I wanted to live my life. I wanted to enjoy it and have that real life student experience. I lived in a dorm. It was phenomenal. I remember partying until like 5 a.m. in the morning, crashing in for like an hour, and then starting my classes at 7 a.m., right? And it was just phenomenal. I absolutely loved it. But in terms of people that surrounded me, I had like a group of friends who I loved to party with, and then I had a group of friends who I loved to build robots with. So those were the two main groups that I would hang out with. A lot of my friends ended up staying and doing their PhDs at our university, so that's kind of cool. But that was really my crowd. I loved trying to build robots, although I feel like hardware never really liked me. So I remember burning transistors, connecting things the other way around so they would like literally burst in flames. I would have my soldier inside my dorm room and like put together PCBs, right? So that was kind of cool. I remember this one student from room next door coming over and knocking on the door. It's like, hey girls, do you have some pans that we could like borrow to fry some eggs? Because they came completely unprepared to the dorm and not even had like any kitchen utensils. and he saw my soldering iron on my desk, and he was like, "Whoa!" Like super impressed, because he didn't, I guess, expect a girl to have a soldering iron on her desk and build robots. So
Yeah, it's hard to even script that. It's hard to even find like a TV show and just put all those elements together to be like, here's the scene.
I mean, right? There should be totally a show that features that kind of people, like myself, right?
I absolutely think so, because I mean, like, eventually we're going to take all those concepts. That really did help you out in terms of, like, just putting literally pieces together. It was quite funny how you were mentioning some of the projects you're working on was literally on fire. I feel like a lot of the projects I've worked on, even during that time of my life, was mostly like, oh, yeah, this project is definitely on fire. And it was something about, like, the code not running or something like that. But yours was, like, definitely you could you could feel it in that moment going on. But that was kind of the fun part, where I keep on saying that everybody's story going into tech and even going into just working with a lot of tech people today especially comes from different backgrounds. As you're saying, the robotics, was that, I guess, like your full first time job? Because Perry likes to compare the school life versus like the real world, right, where they throw you in there, you get bitten by all kinds of people out there. But was that your first role? Was it in robotics, or were you already transitioned into like a more software engineering role?
So I started with robotics. I really wanted to stay away from software because I hated it. Mostly because I didn't really get it, you know? I didn't understand what's important in software, which is what I learned in my first software engineering job. But my first two jobs in the real world were while I was studying. And, you know, I had all this energy to party hard and work hard at the same time. So I had been a robotics consultant working for a company that sold these Lego-based robots that we would create workshops for teachers and schools on how to use them. And that was pretty fun. And then I worked at a company that actually built robots from scratch. And they worked in like a European Union's equivalent of DARPA, which was they would have a project and we would pair up with different universities across European Union and build whatever robot they needed for their project. And that was like insanely cool because I studied robotics, and most of my friends actually ended up being software engineers, and I was probably the only one who actually became a robotics engineer, or one of very few. And I quickly realized, working on a robotics project, building robots for European Union, that it's kind of boring and slow, you know? Like being young, you want to have that speed, that growth, you want to challenge yourself. And it turns out building robots takes time. And the robots that I was building would end up somewhere in the lab with 4 or 5 PhD students, and probably nobody would ever see them ever again. So that was not the kind of impact that I was looking for. Again, I couldn't really define it back then, but that was the thing that I can see now that I was chasing. So then I ended up moving into software engineering. That was my third professional job. I already graduated with my master's degree in robotics, control engineering and robotics to be precise. And I went into software engineering because it felt like the apps that my friends would have deployed touched millions of lives. And that felt like an impact. So I was like, maybe that's more interesting. Even though I hate programming, but I kind of have the basics, so I guess I could learn on the job. Okay, let me just figure it out. And, you know, money was better. So that's how I transitioned into software engineering.
I think that sounds like a luxury, if anything, of being able to see both sides at that point, right? Especially, I'm not just talking about the tech side, but even sometimes when you have to assess a situation, everything, it's better to have seen both sides and be like, oh, that's why the engineering people need XYZ. That's why they require these kind of like physical checks, if anything. And then when you jump onto the software side, it's like, oh, maybe we don't do sometimes as much checking on some ends, but then there's other conversation that I think about in terms of like the architecture of your software and then all this kind of fun stuff that kind of puts together. So I'm glad to be able to hear from somebody who's done both. I came out saying that like if I pick 10 people that I know in tech, there's barely anybody who's gotten the opportunity to really just make that jump like that. One thing that is highlighted on your book as well is this journey of, you know, going from initially, I guess, like more of an entry-level software engineering role to all the way to like senior engineers and beyond on that. What did that journey look briefly for you? Because, of course, I think initially you did join Nokia for a bit. Is that what it is? You were working at Nokia for a while.
Yes, and we were deploying code that would have LTE network accessibility for mobile phones. So the team that I worked on created this kind of software for the network. Whenever you send a message or connect to the internet, your phone would be connecting with a cell phone tower, and that cell phone tower had the software I've been working on. I mean, probably what I wrote is no longer there. I mean, let's face it, it's been years. I mean, definitely people refactored it out already.
I mean, we are talking about telecom, so as far as I know, there is maybe at least a bit of code up there that you probably wrote since back then. Sorry, I'm a little bit disrespecting all the telecoms out there. Sorry, all the T-Mobiles, all the Sprints, all the whatever out there. You can hate
But
Perry on
in
that.
terms of the features that I worked on, there was one that was particularly impactful, I felt like, which was essentially a notification software in case of a tsunami that would send warning messages to all the cell phones within the area. And I felt like, whoa, I got to work on this, create a state machine in the code that would allow for the people in a life-threatening situation to be warned and run.
I mean, thank God the mission of that project is so like tangible. Thank God you could really just feel like if you didn't have this software, what would the world look like? And that's why I came out saying that, like, sharing example like that, it's so hard to actually think about a lot of that on the spot.
I have some other examples in terms of impact. Another one that was after I moved to the States was when I worked on a software, and I hated the tech stack, but the impact and the mission of the project was really critical. It helped refugee families reunite their families, basically. And every day I felt on fire. And I was like, I'm going to get to love this tech stack because this is so important. This has like huge impact on people's lives. And that's something that really made me want to wake up every morning and go to work and perfect the code and make sure that there's no things that are potential features that are missing, right?
Like, you did find a tool, which is software in this case, to just help so many people out there. And as you're saying, like, these impacts are extremely tangible on that. In this journey, as you were saying, you did move country during that whole time. And that's another exposure of like a completely different crowd, culture, knowledge in itself. Was that, I guess, like, I think you would say it's like an enhancement to your journey as like a techie person in the end, but maybe from how would you describe that? Was it hard to really accustom like the tech from one end, just life on one end, and just continuing that on the other end, actually?
Oh, yeah. It was one of the hardest things I've done in my life. Just uproot my life and move. But let me be honest, Perry, it's why I moved. I met my husband backpacking through Europe, and he convinced me to move to the States. I tried to convince him to move somewhere in Europe. But people in love do crazy things. And the crazy thing that I did is that I was like, okay, I guess I'm moving across Atlantic to try and pursue this love, because it felt like if I don't give it a try, I'm going to regret it for the rest of my life. And I did. I did move and ended up finding a software engineering career here. It was easy, to be honest, because I feel like the European or Eastern European training is very detail oriented and it's very knowledge heavy. So I was very skilled in what it is that I was doing technically, but what I was missing are those social, culturally appropriate communication and collaboration skills. And that was a tremendous lesson for me that I didn't see for a few years, and I didn't get that kind of feedback from my direct managers, even though they had worked in like intercultural contexts before. But I guess nobody ever figured it out until someone outside of work pointed it out that, those are the skills that I'm missing and that are severely impacting my career.
No, absolutely. And I was literally just going to mention in a sense of like, of course, eventually you got into coaching and everything, but between your journey of doing robotics and software engineering and getting more years of seniority in the software engineering world, of course, you did have exposure to mentors as well. As you were saying, like every mentors go from every range, right? Best, great, good, sort of good, a little bit less good and everything on that. But any kind of like just general qualities that you just remembered from the mentors you had before, obviously you eventually went into coaching and everything, but was there some good standout qualities that when you're working as a software engineering to be like, oh, that's a mentor I want to be, or I want to listen, I want to follow as you're living through that?
Absolutely. I consider myself extremely lucky because my fast career progression from junior to senior in little over 2 years would not have happened if it wasn't for my mentors and the people that I worked with. And if I think about their impact, I'm tremendously grateful because they helped me speed up and accelerate my journey. That's what I'm trying to pay forward now as a coach, is to help people see the things that are so obvious once you have realized them, but accelerate your career track in tremendous ways, right? For me, I had incredible first year roommate. I was assigned in a dorm. It's kind of random who they assign you to in Poland. And my friend that was my roommate, Gosia, she works for Google now. So she was able to like help me wipe my tears and explain that I forgot a semicolon and that's why my code in C++ was not compiling, right? And she had the patience to actually walk me through it. She was also a great role model for me because she was another woman in tech, so that was phenomenal. And then when I landed my very first job at Nokia as a software engineer, I had my mentor Michał, and Michał was able to show me what software engineering really is about, which is not creating complex and convoluted code, but it's more about maintainability, coming into something that other people have created and being able to jump in and carry on what was already there in place while fixing things along the way. But it's not about showing off your skills. It's more about creating things that are easy for other people to comprehend. So when you have a newbie jumping into your code base, they should be able to ramp up quickly, right? And that maintenance and creating code that's self-explanatory and easy for other people to understand are the key. And, I never got that kind of knowledge back in the university when I was studying, and that's why I hated programming. So I kind of went from this hating programming college self to loving programming as my professional self because Michał explained it to me what was really important then. And then when it comes to my transition from junior to senior, getting that particular senior software engineer promotion, it was more like junior, mid-level, and then senior. I got the senior position because of Pavel, my next mentor here in the United States, and he was the one who told me Dagna speed is great because I was really quick in delivery. But being quick often meant making silly mistakes or not taking things into account because I cared about the execution. And he told me Dagna fast is great, but reliable is better. And that kind of changed again how I was thinking about the code. Okay, so it's not just about me cranking out code fast. It's about me cranking out quality code at a reasonable speed.
I love these words, right? Maintainability, scalability, like very little tech debt. I feel like these are very like enticing words for so many engineers out there. But one of the key highlights I'm mentioning, and I was definitely nodding. I know it's audio only, but behind the scenes I was absolutely nodding in the sense of like mentors come in all shapes and form. They're not meant to be like a spiritual leader that you just join a group and be like, that's the mentor. Let's follow all their movements, all their yogi styles and everything. Like this is just an analogy if anything, but peers are absolutely great mentors. And some of the stories that you were sharing just now in terms of like, it's just people around you, whether they're like, it's not exactly a manager at the end of the day, just peers around you that you eventually are able to learn from, experience, teaching, sharing knowledge, all that. And this is basically a lot of the foundation of when you started doing professional coaching. Engineer turned coaches for engineers. That's a great way of looking at it in the sense of you understood what's going on. So did that happen overnight? Was that a thing where one day you woke up and you're like, oh, today I'm going to start coaching a lot of engineers? I'm pretty sure it wasn't. But what did that look like? You were working full-time software engineering and then it was slowly just offering help to people? How did you get into that?
As a software engineer, senior engineer especially, you get to mentor junior folks. And I noticed that it was bringing me a lot of joy ramping people up, onboarding, explaining like how things work, how you put the pieces of puzzle together. I love debugging things and understanding how like different pieces kind of work together. And I think it's part of my robotics background where you have to be kind of like interdisciplinary and see the big picture of how different pieces of puzzle fit together, and then trying to explain it to other people. So I was already doing that within my job. It was bringing me a lot of joy and fulfillment. But there is a day where I can pinpoint this pivot have happened, or what kind of started the avalanche that ended with me being a coach for engineers. And that was a beautiful September day in 2019 when I got to my office and had a one-on-one with my manager. At that time, a lot of things in my life happened. I recently moved a few years back from Poland to United States. This was my second job in United States. I got married, I had a baby, and you know, the job that I was in, it was, I think, 3 years at the time, or 2 years. It felt like I was becoming more and more of a cog in a machine rather than someone who has an impact. And I burned myself out. So a lot of things kind of coalesced together into that one meeting when I'm with my manager, we're talking, and out of nowhere, I started crying. And I could not believe in myself that I was acting so unprofessional, that I couldn't keep my cool, because being professional is something that I highly value. So, like, I myself was shocked by the fact that I couldn't stop tears running from my eyes down my cheek. Fortunately for me, this particular manager was phenomenal. Also a woman in tech. And the one thing that she said was, hey, this is my therapist info. I've been going to therapy for X amount of years. Maybe you could call her, right? So that person didn't try to fix me, didn't really offer a lot of advice. She just pointed me in the right direction. And I finally admitted to myself, okay, let's stop pretending everything's fine when it clearly isn't, because I'm crying at work, damn it. So I reached out. I ended up enrolling in talk therapy. And this was a phenomenal experience because having a third-party professional outside of my workplace, outside of my relationships, who got exactly what it is that I was going through as a new mom, as an immigrant, as a woman in tech, a minority, she was able to help me see things from a different perspective. And that really transformed what I was going through. And slowly, I was able to kind of pull myself out of the burnout, of the depression, redefine what it is that's important for me in my life, what are the values, my guiding principles, and what it is that I'm trying to do with my life, right? It was such a wake-up call. But realizing the incredible impact that our sessions had on me and my quality of life, it kind of clicked. I was like, this is what I want to do. I want to talk to people and help them improve their lives. Like, that's the impact that I really, really want. And that's what sent me on this pursuit of coaching.
Wow, I keep on saying it's one of those things where when you get to hear, when you get to experience it, the way I see a lot of this stuff like unraveling, there's moments where like everybody goes through ups and downs and it bottles up into everything. And then fortunately there's help out there. As we were saying, this reaching out to help, like it is welcomed. It is necessary in some cases. And then even in other cases where after people experience that, they just stop there and be like, oh, my life is better now. Like, let's do that. But then there's also this other push, this other energy that people get from this, be like, I made it through this. I could be so much better tomorrow and help other people realize that. This is where we're going with this, right? This is where we're going, that like you really have this energy to just be able to share it. Because I mean, like, as we were saying, like, nobody asked you to do it. Not trying to be rude or anything to be here, but this is really the night and day difference to be like, you're doing this because you find the purpose, you find the joy. And I absolutely respect that. And this is why I keep on saying that if you culminate a lot of this knowledge, a lot of this like impact that you have on people around you, stuff comes out of it. Number one is, of course, the book Brain Refactor. That's one thing that came out of it. But even just this concept of, I love these words, the mindful dev. It's just these concepts that I absolutely love. there's a lot of meaning behind it, but do you want to just explain real quickly the mindful dev? Like, this is really a concept that I know you use a lot, and I definitely want to hear. I want more people to hear more about it.
Yeah, I would say that from my perspective, having been a software engineer who was completely not aware how her actions was impacting people around me, that's what I was missing, that mindfulness of what it is that I'm doing that has the impact that I'm not seeing, right? Especially when it came to that promotion, because like as a senior engineer, what was next for me is I wanted to be a team lead. And because of the lack of skills in the people skills area, I was not getting promoted and I was frustrated. And I even got promoted, like someone got promoted over my head who had less skills, less experience, less knowledge, and he got the job. And I was like, what? I couldn't get it, right? Because I was missing that mindfulness piece. So right now, this is what I do with my clients. I really help them see. I help them become more mindful in their job. And whether that's an engineer or an ambitious professional in tech who has some programming background, it is really critical to just kind of gain that awareness, that mindfulness, because usually what's stopping you from that success, whatever it is for you, or that next step for you, is you. And in order to discover that, you need to be mindful.
That's so great. I'll keep on saying it. The mindful dev is just stuff that you hear the first time. It just stucks with you to be like, hey, you could be a little bit more mindful in those PR comments. Like when you see those like PR comments thread, you could be a little bit more mindful in those. So that's why I keep on saying that like the mindful dev is definitely a movement that of course you champion a lot. The mindfuldev.com, if anything, is something that you manage a lot to share a lot of your knowledge. And then as we we're saying, even more recently, the newly released book that you were working on for months, if anything, Brain Refactor. Optimize your internal code to thrive in tech, engineering, and get more success, fulfillment, money, opportunities, impact, and growth. Congratulations on the book.
Thank you. I mean, this is like a dream come true, truly, Perry. And, you know, the book really talks about, well, let's start from the beginning. I really wanted to write it like 7 years ago. And I created these mind maps for chapters and what I wanted to write about. But I quickly realized, well, all this is just me talking about my career. So it's like great, but like, I kind of started it, but I didn't finish it. But the dream, the seed was already planted there. I really wanted to do it. And to be honest, I always sucked at writing. My teachers would tell me that it's just not my thing, that I'm the analytical mind. I need to focus on math because writing is not my thing. So 5 years forward from that 7 years ago, I finally decided, well, it's not just my journey. Now I have been coaching people and I have validated that what I have to say works for people across different industries, across different domains. It just works. And I have proof because I helped people get phenomenal results in a very short time frame because my coaching package is 4 to 6 months. And I've seen people literally double their salary, get past imposter syndrome, get out of burnout, and get these incredible transformations in how they see themselves, which helps them in interview setting, in a job setting, in gaining clarity on what it is that they're trying to do next in their career, right? Because I've worked with people from an individual contributor position all the way to a CTO of like a small to medium-sized startup. And this is kind of like a culmination of that dream. Having this book right here, and I'm looking at it right now, it's like right in front of me, front and center. I just feel like it's a mountain that I've climbed. It's like my Everest in a way. And again, what I'm chasing here, Perry, is that impact, right? Because there's 44 million software engineers out there in the world, and I doubt I could work with every one of them one-on-one, even if they all wanted, right? There's just not enough time. But with this book, I might be able to reach some of them. And this book has the ability to impact and change people's lives. And this is something I'm super excited about. And to be honest, I thought I'm going to write it in 6 months. It ended up being 2 years. But I'm really happy that it took longer than what I thought, because I wanted to make sure it's a quality product. That if I look back at it 10 years from now, I will still be proud of what I put out there.
Writing is hard because there's a million words out there, but the ones you need aren't any of the millions. The ones that you need to express what you want to be saying is not a single one of the million words out there. Now let's put it together. But when we're talking about this book, Brain Refactor, there's definitely some highlights. I obviously went through it a little bit. Some fun excerpts that I could just pluck out because I love doing this a little bit. But this one that stuck out more than anything is many engineers work their whole careers without once addressing their internal code. And then you eventually, literally after that, just like breaks it the whole down. And then there's other stuff where it's like, just like you could refactor any app, you could refactor your mind. I think this is like the emphasis on really being like, it's not helpless. It's not a helpless cause that you can't fix any of these problems. And of course, Paris is curious at the end of the day. As we're saying, the book itself, 7 chapters, and it's great topics. These are the topics that I yearn for. I would wish 90% of my meetings we were just talking about this. But if we have a couple of minutes right now, I could probably just pick a couple of topics that we could maybe go over, because I keep on saying that these are valuable. You really describe a lot of good examples and good journeys in the chapters itself, especially collecting from your own experience, as you were saying, your mentors, where you did well, where you did wrong. And for some of the people that just are maybe in that position, something that you do mention, like early on, I think this is like chapter 1 or chapter 2, is you're talking a little about the source code of the mind, but also decoding feedback from a programmer's perspective, right? This is very like assessment level like of understanding how that works. So maybe for just like a preview of like maybe an intro into those, what exactly does it mean from like a programmer's perspective to be decoding feedback, let's say?
So as a programmer, what is it that you do with feedback? Like, what kind of feedback you usually get? Number one, from your end users or beta testers, whenever they're using your app or program and something's not working, like, hey, I pressed this button and this is supposed to happen, but it didn't, right? So that's feedback number one. So like the outcome is not what is expected to be. And the second thing is you get that feedback in like either written form in a PR, like based on your work, the code that you've produced, and other engineers kind of letting you know what you could improve or if it's fine, or in your one-on-one meetings, right? So we tend to think about feedback as words directed to us, but in reality, feedback is just information that you can use in order to refactor your legacy mental code. And what do I mean by that? Getting a promotion or not getting a promotion is feedback. Feeling like what you do matters or like you hate your job, that's feedback. The question is, what are you going to do with that information? Because you get to do something about it if you choose to, right? Again, that's where mindfulness piece comes in as well. Because anything that's happening around you is a form of feedback. The question is, how do you extract that information that's carried by feedback and use it for the improvement of your mental legacy code? And one thing that I think is really critical here and what makes my process work really well is if you're able to think about your brain, your patterns of thinking, your beliefs, your identity as a product, something external from who you actually are or meant to be, it's so much easier to change things up because it's no longer personal, right? With products, we get to have this impact on them and we get to change them and shape them however we want them. And what I'm trying to prove with my book and all the research that went into it is that the same is true for our brains, both on the software and the hardware level.
Yeah, and that definitely already gives us a perspective in terms of like the decoding part. As you were saying, like on that level of how you program your brain, on how complex it gets. Because no matter whether you want it or not, it keeps on building. Your brain keeps on building. Whether it's like you learn something new or you learn something that was existing or better, this like, I guess like tying together may not always be as successful the first time, and that's why you have to rewire it a little bit. Spaghetti code, spaghetti brain, if you want to call it. I feel like that's something that you really emphasize over there, as you're saying, like decoding the feedback. And of course, this is like external output. Actually, I'm going to get into this a little bit on that. But as we were saying, there's not a moment that people work in tech and they haven't thought about like, but why am I not fully, comfortable doing this? Or am I not fully comfortable doing that? And that's really where a lot of these, like, as people say, like root causes and all that kind of stuff. But one of the framework that you really bring into light that is like, as you were saying, there's research and there's like even stories that you were saying applying these frameworks is, I think you would call this the Brain Refactor algorithm, if I got that correctly. I've read like so many great words, but that's one that really stuck with me throughout the whole book. But there's multiple steps to it, and even there's a visual aid. So maybe like, could you high level guide us through that? Because I keep on saying that like I've read through this, I've seen through this. It really is amazing to maybe just hear it from you directly, as opposed to be regurgitating a lot of this stuff.
Well, Perry, thank you for all that excitement. It just validates to me like how important this is, having this book put out there for people like yourself to be able to read and be like, oh, this is what I was missing. Okay, all right, this is how I use it now. Perfect, right? Let me go and get that, boom, whatever it is that you desire, right? In terms of the Brain Refactor algorithm, you're right. There's 5 steps, and I would love to talk about merge conflicts. So step number 1 is just like in software. Something doesn't work. There are outcomes that are not desired, that you didn't either anticipate, or they're just a faulty behavior of your software. You got to identify root causes. You have to dive into the code base and analyze what's inside. In case of, the programming piece, what would you do? You would start hopping through the files, try to understand how things are linked together, which line is connected to which line, what function calls what, and you would just kind of track it, try to figure it out. With mind, it's similar in the sense that you have certain beliefs or behaviors that were programmed into you, and you get to track either memories or beliefs or any sort of thoughts that are coming up, because we tend to believe that our thoughts are true, but a lot of the time they're not. They're just projections of a lifetime of experience that we've had, and they're just a modeling approximation, because our brains have to like model the world to make split-second decisions that aid our survival as human species, right? There's a lot of evolution theory going into that. But with the identifying root causes, essentially what you have to do is reflect. Think back. Think if the behavior that you're currently doing that was identified as not the outcome that you want, in my case, it was like just rude communication and lack of communication and collaboration skills. When I moved from Poland to United States, which was very apparent, it was holding me back from getting that promotion, I realized how my cultural upbringing was playing part in that. That in Poland, we tend to be much more direct than people are in United States, especially in the southern United States where I'm located. I'm in North Carolina right now. And you have to kind of like reflect and think about how your lifetime of experience program you to be the way you are. And then figure out, okay, this was super helpful, right? But this wasn't. These are the lines of code in my mental programming sitting between my ears that's not working. Okay, I want to change that. Once you're aware, once you figured out why you're behaving the way you do, that's creating the outcomes you don't really want, you have to plan out the refactor. So the question is, okay, in coding, once you figure out what the problem is, you have to figure out, what do I replace it with, right? How do I refactor this piece of code? Same thing happens here. You want to sit down and think, okay, whenever I get asked a question, I want to reply in a way that's not like this, because this wasn't working, but like that, because I know based on research, based on feedback, based on what I have read in the books or what my therapist or coach told me, that this is going to work, so I want to replace it. And once you have that plan, you kind of know what are you replacing with what. And you have to understand what are your triggers because that's when you go to step number 3 and script the new responses. You literally create scripts that define steps, that tell you what to do instead. A lot of the time, what we don't realize is that our brains, because they're optimized by nature and evolution, they're running on autopilot. And a lot of split-second decisions that we make are, again, based on our lifetime of experience, right? And so the question is, how do we rewrite that? We have to, one, kind of capture that moment, like put a break point, stop ourselves from going through our autopilot, and put in a completely new response, a different script, a few steps. For example, I'm noticing that I'm in a conversation with another engineer I don't even like. Okay, I'm going to pause. I'm going to take a few deep breaths. And then I'm going to remind myself that we're working together on a common goal, and I'm going to put aside the fact I don't like them, right? That could be your script. It doesn't have to be complicated. It's just a few steps that you want to start implementing to interrupt your default routines. Step number 4 is building libraries of evidence. Those libraries of evidence, you could think of them as, let's say you have a mobile app and you want to display some images. Sure, you could create a whole library from scratch that handles images, or you could just import one that exists, right? The same concept applies here. You want to build libraries of evidence for the change that you're trying to create, right? It could be an outside model. Like, for example, I want to communicate differently like this other engineer on that other team. I see that when he speaks up, everybody just listens to him. I want to be more like him. Okay, what does he do that works? What does he do? How does he think about it? I could reach out to this person, have a conversation with them to understand that modeling. Or I could use visualization. Or as someone pointed out to me the other day, visualization is kind of like a simulation of how the new code would run. You just sit down and simulate it in your mind. And it's really, there's a lot of research, especially if anyone listening watched the Olympics, that talks about how top athletes in the world, top sportsmen, gold winner, medalists, use this technique in order to prepare themselves and win and come out of the top and, get all these accolades. The 5th step is to continuously execute. And I know you might be like, Dagna, but you just said that refactoring the brain is just like refactoring an app. And if I commit my code and deploy, then that's it. Well, with the brain, because you have to create new hardware to support the software that you're trying to implement, it works differently. You're working with the biological mechanisms. So you have to literally lay the foundation, create new neurons and synapses, and that takes time. That's why the continuous execution is a repetitive process. It's kind of like building a habit, basically, of doing things differently, of thinking differently, that lays those hardware connections that help you out with creating a new, improved code base.
I like that part of especially continuously executing, continuously just practicing everything. I mean, the direct term for people in tech, of course, is CI/CD, if anything, just like continuously integrate, deploy.
I know.
It's a loop, just throw everything in there, just because obviously I've clearly been seeing too much of that recently, if anything. But all the steps make sense. As we were saying, if anybody's trying to tackle a large problem, because you were saying, like, this refactor is not a small one code fixer, if anything, right? This is meant to really just improve it, not just one time. It's meant to be a framework that improves it perpetually, and it's a lot more sustainable and a lot more maintainable. If anything, it's less effort to make better for the future, basically. So the steps that we just went through: step 1, identify root causes; step 2, plan out the refactor; step 3, script new responses; step 4, build libraries of evidence; and step 5, continuously execute. This is something that you could definitely check out directly in the book. There's diagrams as graph. Maybe I could just probably take 10 seconds, more than 10 seconds, to talk about this graph that I love seeing, and people will obviously look this up in the book online, but it's a quadrant with 2 axes. One of the axes have internal and external, and the other axes have away and towards. I know this is audio only, but if you just picture this axis, Like, how does that align with what we just went through, these 5 steps? If anything, there's a direct correlation.
Yeah, absolutely. So I use it for the first 2 steps, right? For identifying root causes and then planning out refactors, because the following steps are kind of helper steps, if you will. But, initially, whenever you're doing the root cause analysis, you want to pay attention to 2 things that are happening, which is something that's happening internally, like what's coming up for you, like what are the thoughts, what are the beliefs, are there any feelings or sensations in your body that are coming up when the triggering situation happens, right? And then when you're planning, you want to kind of think about, okay, this behavior, this trigger makes me act this particular way, and that moves me away from what I really want. Instead, I would rather have feelings or sensations internally in my body or set of beliefs coming up in my thoughts, and I would rather act this particular way that will move me toward the goal that I'm trying to achieve, whether that's a promotion, getting more opportunities, being, a better performer in an interview setting. So it's really about reflection, and that's the tool that's super easy, and it's often used in cognitive behavioral therapy, and that's where I learned that particular tool. I learned it in my therapy setting, and I thought, 1, it was super easy. 2, it was super easy to use. 3, it was extremely effective. And it's a really great, like you said, Perry, visual aid that helps you understand of like, okay, it's not just how I act, but it's also what's internally coming up for me. And a lot of the time, working with engineers, one thing that I noticed is that as engineers, we don't really like the touchy-feely stuff, like emotions. Ugh. Like even emotional intelligence, unless you're like super into a leadership position and you've read tons of books on leadership, you are not going to care about EQ or EI. Like, let's be real. Most of software engineers are all about the tech, and they do not care about the people aspect, right? And so the way of looking at this analysis is very analytical, or I try to put it in a way that would be enticing for the people who don't like the touchy-feely stuff, who want to like really focus on facts, on what's coming up. And again, seeing brain and its wiring as a software product or a hardware product helps us get there, because you could think of your thoughts as logs, basically, of what happened. And when there's a bug, you do analyze the logs, or when there's a crash that happens in your app, you do analyze the log. So if you think of your thoughts as logs, feelings coming up as logs, then it's so much easier to dive deeper into that analysis.
If people are looking for this help, you're not doing anything new to try to solve this problem. You're doing the same thing as you experience day to day, but with the help of a framework, with the help of some guidance that comes from especially somebody who's gone through a lot of this stuff. This is really something that is valuable. And I keep on saying that, like, I could spend hours and hours and hours talking about this specific wrap, but even everything around it, as we're saying, the steps, like, it's in the book. You can't miss it. It's in there. I'm not going to get into the other corporate one where it's like one of the axes is impact and the other axis is effort. Then it's like low impact, low effort, high effort. Anyways.
Ooh, but that's a really big one too. Because like I've noticed working with multiple people that, we tend as engineers to chase the things that are fun, that are intellectually stimulating, that are hard, that make us learn something new. And the reality is, sometimes it's the boring stuff that has the actual business impact that can help you with getting that promotion. So having that awareness is super key.
And of course, there's a chapter on that really marks all of that kind of fun stuff. I'm so curious about these terms, if anything. Is that like, I know it's sort of related, just dovetailing off what you just said, but this is a what is question. What is the Matthew effect?
Yeah, that's a big one. I learned about Matthew effect in a conference, and it basically states that the more you're known, the more opportunities you're going to have, right? It's kind of like jumping on a recognition train. So it's a running train, and getting on is really, really hard. But once you're on it, the opportunities like just keep coming just because people already know you're top of mind, right? There's this equivalent, because it's I believe it's coming from like a Bible term or was inspired by Bible, and a lot of you could think of an equivalent as the rich get richer, the poor get poorer. And so the Matthew effect in terms of recognition is basically, if you have been known for solving problems as an engineer, if you're the go-to person, you're going to get more people to recognize you just because you've been recognized once.
And a lot of people already experience this. A lot of people experience this kind of stuff, but also a lot of people don't experience it in the sense of like this is something that they yearn for, something that they want, and something that they couldn't even put a name or a term to it. And which is why I came on saying that you are opening a lot of like brains over here, a lot of like sharing a lot of knowledge on that. The other one that is very similar, like maybe similar, but in the same vein as that, is we have this term called helper's high at the end of the day. And that's something that obviously like some people just live. Sometimes I wake up and I'm like, I'm going to help 1,000 people today, but maybe just a more formal way of explaining what is helper's high.
Well, it's a phenomenon that occurs when someone helps you out and they feel really good about themselves because they helped you out. You have to just be very smart about how it is that you ask for help, because there's a good way and bad ways of asking for help. But as an example of the book, let me tell you, Perry, I've reached out to almost everyone that I have on my network on LinkedIn, asking them if they would be a better review or a better reader for my book. And a lot of people said yes, because one, they enjoy reading books, and two, they're in for intelligent entertainment because they're going to learn new things based on my book. And, you know, the title, there's a curiosity factor there, like Brain Refactor, what? So a lot of people said yes because they wanted to help. And they thought it would be a fun task for them to do, so they get to experience that helper's high. And for me, it was so much easier to ask them for help knowing about that particular phenomenon. I felt like, yes, I am giving you something. If you're going to get nothing out of my book, at least you're going to get that helper's high.
And people love these like happy moments in their career. Like this is something that like people keep on thinking that like, oh, my job, like even the fact they say, oh, my job, like kind of thing, there's always that like connotation. But people do live for these like helpers, I was saying, like giving people feedback and being able to see how it helps other be better at the end of the day. And I keep on saying that even the book itself, it covers more than just like the happy stuff at the end, or even just like the more like technical stuff. There's a part of it where you really dig into like people in their different states, I guess. One of them that I see a lot, there's a term imposter syndrome. And I do know that like there's loads of examples that you could share in the book, even in real life, if not more in real life. But I mean, I personally, I've worked in engineering for a while and software for a while. So imposter syndrome left and right every day, yes. But for the people, I guess, less familiar with the term to begin with, what is imposter syndrome, at least in the context of maybe corporate or even just working in a full-time job, if anything?
So I would call it a faulty legacy code that leads to you stopping yourself from opportunities. Basically, everyone will every now and then doubt their skills or doubt whether they're capable of doing what's in front of them. That's normal. That's human. The question is, what follows after those thoughts come up? Like, do you give in and then literally spiral down? That's imposter syndrome. But if you're able to recognize, like, okay, I'm having doubts, but the reality is I just stepped into this new role and I haven't really learned the ropes just yet, so I still have some time to actually learn and be better at this position. That's when you're experiencing growing pains, right? It's still going to be painful. It's going to hurt because you're not going to be excellent on day one. But the question here is like, what is it that you do when that doubt comes in? Because everybody has doubt. And honestly, I feel like imposter syndrome is being overused in our industry. And, you know, it's being slapped on that regular, normal doubt. The question is, does it spiral out of control? If it does, okay, that's imposter syndrome. If it doesn't, you're good. It's normal.
Yeah, I honestly couldn't have said it better myself. I feel like this is the experience that a lot of people feel, but they can't really put into words at the end of the day, where just day in, day out to be like, am I really doing this? No, well, the question is more like, am I doing this correctly, if anything? Because that's where the imposter kind of comes from. But no, believe in yourself, believe in a lot of the ways, believe in a lot of what Dagna is sharing, because I genuinely believe that you're not in there alone. Absolutely not for this imposter syndrome at the end of the day. Okay, maybe this last one, if not before last one, but you did already mention this, burning out. I think it's a term that nobody really wanted to say, maybe like 10 years ago, 20 years ago, even just working from even for example, lifers. I think I don't know if you mentioned the word lifer in the book. I don't think I've got the word in there, but it's really this attitude of being like, I'm able to do this my whole life. I'm able to do this like day in, day out. The structure really allows me to do that. I'm able to grind through it, if not anything. But that's not the reality anymore. The reality nowadays is that like everybody has, a certain bandwidth capacity of doing things, and not being able to manage that is definitely a concern. At least this is Perry saying it. It's definitely a concern, if you agree or not. But
no, I totally hear you. And I'm the same, There's like so many things I could be doing. Like, why not try and do them all? And the reality is, exactly, you have limited capacity. So the question is, how do you prioritize what it is that you're trying to achieve? So like a lot of dealing with burnout comes from trying to do it all, trying to do too much, and not having like a really good boundaries, protective measures in place that will prevent you from burning yourself out. Because I get it, you can do so many things. There's so many opportunities. There's so many things we could be doing with our lives. So, I mean, we live in such an abundant time as humans, right? Most of us will probably hit our 70s, 80s, 90s. A lot of people will probably work well into their 80s, or could if they wanted to, if they take care of their bodies and minds. So there's so much opportunity, and it's like, and at the same time we live in this distraction driven life full of social media, full of internet, full of seeing how other people are doing, and it's becoming difficult to make a choice on what it is that you want to focus on just because of the flood of information. So it's very easy to burn yourself out. And going back to us engineers chasing that curiosity, staying late to fix that bug because that's rewarding, and it that also gets us that helper's high because we're solving problems for our clients. So it's very easy to burn yourself out as an engineer. But the other way to think about it too is like, the brain is your most efficient, effective tool that you use on a daily basis, because your brain is involved literally in everything that you do. So if you do allow yourself to burn out, you're not going to be capable of solving those kinds of problems, or making decisions, or pursuing the things that were fun, that look good on paper, that you wanted to do. So it's really about thinking about mental health, in my opinion, as an investment, because you're keeping your best tool sharp. You're keeping your best tool for solving problems most effective, efficient, and optimized. And in the long run, even if you don't get to do everything this particular week, over the next couple years, you will be surprised about how far you've come and how much you could actually accomplish.
That marathon attitude, I absolutely love hearing it. It's not a sprint. It's definitely not take your time with it and grow with it, if anything. One thing, if I could drop that, I don't know if it's a trap from corporate. I've seen this a little bit everywhere in different parts where they're saying oh yeah, that's going to be resolved, but next sprint or next quarter. It's don't rely on corporate on your burning out ness, working on anything. I think there's a lot of these resources external to your work and everything, as we're saying, whether it's the book Brain Refactor, whether it's just hearing Dagna talk about a lot of these topics, I would say from my own experience over the years, use those as a louder voice than the corporate voice of we'll fix that next quarter, we'll fix that the next retro. I've heard this so many times over the year. It's very please dissociate those two, and if you are experiencing any of the burnouts, then at least you know more advice after today's conversation, if anything. Sorry, I'm gonna sneak in this last one because I feel like I'm being too greedy, if anything. But this is the word where people say engineers just suck at talking to people and just suck at communicating and just suck at just people stuff, if anything. I've been a vehement like, no, that's not true. Like, take that back, if anything. People are like, oh, Perry, this is, I don't even know if I'm bragging about anything, but like, Perry, you're so like outspoken, you're so not an engineer. I'm like, whoa. Like, it's two different things, right? You can't just say that all engineers are not outgoing like this, but it is something that you do mention in the book itself. So when we're talking about lacking the soft skills or anything like that, what are some keys? What are some keys, like directions that you could work on yourself, refactor on yourself to be able to just realize that or address it in the long run?
Yeah, so there are two key elements to address. Number one, realizing where you are on the spectrum from being a lone wolf to a master collaborator. It's a whole spectrum. Most of engineers tend to lean towards the lone wolf end, but it's the master collaborators who get to staff level positions, who get to be architects, who get to be CTOs because they know how to leverage other people and communicate and collaborate effectively. But the reality on, regarding that spectrum is most of us lean towards the lone wolf end is because of how we're trained and how we're educated. If you look at any curriculum, any technical curriculum out there for an engineer, basically the technical skills are like super important. There's so much emphasis being put on those particular skills versus the soft skills don't seem to be as relevant, and a lot of the time they're completely absent from the educational agenda. So unless you just happen to be lucky in your career and work with someone who had exceptional people skills and you learned from them on the job, this was not a part of your curriculum. So it's not your fault you're missing those skills because you never had an opportunity to really learn them. And then on the flip side too, if we look at the core of engineering job, which is solving difficult technical problems, you do need focus and solitude time so that you can dive deep into the code base, understand what's going on, what are the different things at play, how things interact with each other. So you need that solo focus time, which again takes you away from practicing your social skills at a coffee machine or while giving a presentation. So not only you don't have those skills to start with when you're starting your engineering career, but also you, because of how the job looks like, you miss out on those little moments where you could potentially practice if you actually valued those skills at all. And most of us just don't because we've been conditioned not to.
I think it's so good to hear it from you. Just in a sense of like, it's so easy to overlook all of that, to be like, it's fine. I don't need to explain every this concept to anybody else anyway. So, and it's not just like verbally speaking. It's also just like the way you communicate asynchronously, the way you write stuff down. And that really just put the whole package together at the end. So
And I mean, I've had issues with that myself because I used to come across as an arrogant asshole. I was that SME who, people didn't really pay attention to because I was coming across as rude. Obviously, it was not my intention, but I just didn't have those skills back then. And I can own it now, and I can pinpoint it and point it out to my clients whenever they're struggling with the same thing.
I think like everybody has to relate to at some point, and the important part is realizing it at the end of the day, right? And that's really where it brings you to the next level. And of course, being able to share that with everyone, that has been the gift of Dagna and her recently released book at the end of the day. But I keep on saying that I would keep you here for 4 hours more if I could, just like asking about this stuff, because I'm just the absolute geek behind this. But at the end of the day, where could people find Dagna, and where could people find Brain Refactor?
The best place is my website. It's themindfuldev.com, and you'll find all the details there. If you're interested, we could also work one-on-one together, and there's more detail on my page. But if you are interested in connecting more and maybe asking some follow-up questions because Perry didn't cover everything, just DM me on LinkedIn. I'm there. I love to connect, build a network, talk to people. So looking forward to anyone who's listening and who is going to connect afterwards. Super stoked about what this episode is going to bring.
Oh, I'll definitely echo that. Reach out directly to Dagna, if anything, whether it's the coaching part directly or even the book. It's available on Amazon, if I'm not mistaken at the moment.
Yes, Amazon, that's right. It's officially launching on October 1st. You can grab your own physical copy before October 1st because I'm still ironing some details for a much cheaper price because it's still kind of like beta launching and I'm still making tiny improvements. So that's the best time to grab it. And then it's coming out on Kindle on October 1st.
Congrats on all of it. I keep on saying it's not easy. I've seen like, say, maybe like a snippet of like people's processes of writing books. That itself is another episode of like Dagna's process of writing a book. That could be another episode, but I keep on saying big congrats on mine, on everybody's end, to you, just because it's not an easy journey on sharing an adventure like that.
Thank you, Perry. I appreciate that. Yeah, it's been an adventure, and I wanted to cry when I got that email that it's available on Amazon, but it was tears of joy. It's funny actually because when I got that email, my husband and I, we were out for lunch. We were having some delicious sushi and it was downpouring and I just wanted to dance in the rain because I was so happy.
The cover is unmistakable, if anything. All the links will be shared in the description notes below. And of course, there's going to be way more content from Dagna, left, right, center, anywhere. She speaks a lot. She does a lot of media on YouTube as well. You could definitely find her in every corner of there. But on my end, Dagna, thanks again for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
And for the rest of you, I will, of course, try to catch you on the next one. Have a great day. See ya. Bye. And that was Dagna Bieda, engineer turned coach for engineers, and author of the book Brain Refactor. All the links are shared in the description notes below. Go check them out. If you would like to be on Podcast Written by a Software Engineer, reach out to us. Just email contact@perrytiu.com. Can't wait to have you on the show. Once again, thank you so much for listening to Podcast Written by a Software Engineer. Don't forget to hit the follow button on your podcast app and leave us a review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. It's completely free. And if you want to tell your friends about Podcast Written by a Software Engineer, that's totally cool as well. Anyways, I am Perry Tiu, and I'll catch you on the next one. Big love.